Audio Unleashed.
Can I express my outrage?
Sure. What are you outraged about?
The Oscars.
Oh, was that last night?
Last night, yes.
As we're recording this.
Another case of completely missing, the cultural moment.
Okay.
And being like way out of date. The Oscars, everyone's raving about the, and this is, music, audiophile stuff. Everyone's raving about Ryan Gosling's performance of the I'm Just Ken song.
Oh, yeah.
And they're talking about how Slash performed a guitar solo.
He did.
And totally unmentioned in it was Wolfgang Van Halen was also playing on stage.
Oh, cool.
And like shredding with Slash. I didn't see a single major media outlet mention it.
Oh, man. Wolfie's a good player, too.
He's awesome.
Yeah.
And yet we got to focus on the guy with the hat because, he's got a hat. So therefore we know who he is. So maybe we need hats. Maybe that's how we take the Audio Unleashed podcast to the next level is we get hats. Okay, I've had my chance to rant. Wolfgang rocks,
you haven't.
And I know he's a big fan of the podcast too, so he'll appreciate the recognition.
Wait, what? Really?
Oh yeah, huge. Oh.
Okay, cool. Well, you're not done ranting though. We've got a lot for you to rant about this week. You are just getting wound up, sir. You're just getting started. Because I guarantee you the first video that we're going to talk about this week is going to give you a lot to rant about. This is from the Absolute Sounds, and the title of it is Synergistic Master and Purple Fuse Listening Test. So just to give you the rundown, these are fuses, basically synergistic fuses. And this new reviewer for TAS puts these fuses in a system and listens and tells you what he heard. And I think we have some opinions about that, but more importantly, I think we have some opinions about some comments in the comments section below from Mr. Michael Fremer, who has some things to say that I think we both want to react to. So what do you want to talk about this week, Brent?
Well, I want to talk about, among other things, I found a really great article in Stereophile, which I think will serve as the amuse-bouche to the synergistic, thing and Michael Fremer's comments. And the article's by Michael Trei, who's been writing about this stuff, almost as long as me. And he does the vinyl column now for Stereophile, and it's called Tone Controls Vinyl EQ Curves and the Mola Mola Lupe. And he goes into a really, really brief and yet thorough and easily understood rundown of the history of record EQ curves. And, this is something that a lot of audiophiles worry about, but he talks about the reasons why you probably shouldn't worry about it. And some of them are actually pretty surprising. And what else we have after that?
Well, our dear friend, Steve Guttenberg, the audiophiliac, has a new video up. 250,000 audiophiliac subscribers can't be wrong. I don't know if I agree with him about that, but I think it is really awesome that Steve has hit 250,000 subscribers because he deserves them. He has earned every one of them. But Steve is in this video talking about several different things, the history of the channel, his history in publication and things like that. But he has some interesting thoughts about subjective versus objective audio journalism. And I think you and I have thoughts about that. I think each of us has thoughts and things we want to sort of interject and respond to Steve about. And but mostly we just want to celebrate Steve hitting 250,000 subscribers. So
I think some of our thoughts will be surprising, maybe even to Steve.
Oh, yeah. I think that's,
and, I've known Steve. I've known Steve since about 1997, and I've worked with him in various capacities. And so he and I are good pals, but there's a great deal we disagree about. And for me, like having lunch with Steve, which I get to do about every 3 or 4 years or something. Because I don't go to New York that much, and he doesn't leave New York that much.
He doesn't have to. People come to him.
Yeah. but every time I have lunch with him, it goes on for hours and hours, and we have a great. Anyway, so that'll be a fun discussion, and then we're going to wrap it up with a special segment for our Patreon subscribers about Minority Report. Spatial audio / Dolby Atmos is the future of music playback, and this is from Darko Audio. This is a blog post he did, and he talks. He actually did a poll among his readers and viewers. And some of the statements he made in here were statements I could have made easily, yet we're coming at it from different angles. I mean, some of it's, as you know, I've been working on a project regarding all this stuff, which I don't want to get into because it involves a company and stuff. But, I've done some Dolby Atmos experimenting, and boy, my experiments, which are, a lot more in depth than what you could do just by messing around with, listening to Apple Music and some Dolby Atmos stuff on there. My experiments are a lot more in depth in there. And so my knowledge and your knowledge, since you've been involved in this too, we know a lot more about it than any of these subjective review guys, except we're coming to the same conclusions.
Yeah.
At least the same conclusion Darko did.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting.
But first, before we get to all of that, let's talk about fuses, buddy.
Yeah.
So just to reiterate here, and I want to give a little bit of background information just so some of our normie listeners have context for what we're talking about here. Again, the title of the video is Synergistic Master and Purple Fuse Listening Tests. So Synergistic is a company that makes a lot of things. They make cables, they make power cords, they make all sorts of things, but they make fuses too. And these are the little fuses that you've seen that look like a bullet that's been flattened on both ends, and you put them in the back of your gear. Well, gear that uses fuses. So they had a fuse called the orange, but they phased that out, and they now have two fuses in their lineup, the Master and the Purple. Have you looked up these products? Have you specifically looked at the product pages for them?
I actually have. I'll confess I have not looked at the product pages for these particular products. However, I have looked at the orange ones. I think I covered them in a show report for Soundstage.
Well, then you probably have a better sense of how much do you think the purple fuse costs? Just guess.
Mid hundreds, maybe, I don't know, maybe 200, 199.
$199.95. You are good, sir.
Got it. See,
now the Master Fuse, that's their step-up fuse, and the Master Fuse, the purple fuse, you're supposed to replace any fuses in your system with this purple fuse, but the Master Fuse, apparently, you only need one of these, and it can kind of go, anywhere in your system, on your DAC or your line conditioner or whatever. How much do you think it costs for a fuse? Just a fuse.
Well, if the other one's 200, this one's $279.99.
$595.
Wow.
Yeah. And they have this little bit of instruction here. Here's the instructions on how to use this thing. If you are switching from an orange or purple fuse to the Master Fuse, start by inserting the Master Fuse in the same direction as the Master Fuse being replaced. If Master Fuse is not an immediate improvement, flip the Master Fuse in the alternate direction. Okay. I mean,
why is that a problem, Dennis? This is your quiz. This is your technical quiz. Why is that a problem?
That's utter nonsense. I mean, the direction of fuse doesn't matter. How could it matter? I mean, there's this common pervasive notion in our industry that everything has a direction, and that if something doesn't sound right, you just change the direction and immediately it's going to sound great. I think it stems from the fact that we've seen cables before that have a ground, but now it's to everything. And basically, if you've got something that's got two ends on it, then apparently it really, really matters which direction the music flows through it. So,
epic fail, Dennis.
Okay,
epic
sorry.
Fail.
Man,
epic fail. That was a way too long answer that did not get to the crux of the issue.
Sorry. Grade my paper.
What passes through, you got an F. What passes through a fuse is alternating current, AC. It
There
goes,
you go.
the polarity of it changes 60 times a second.
Good point.
Okay.
Good point.
Bing, 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 but a lot faster. More like, right?
Right.
So wait a minute. The electrons are going in one direction every 60th of a second, and then they change directions every 60th of a second. So why would if the fuse was directional, why would it matter? Do the electrons know? If you put an arrow on the fuse for what direction it's supposed to go in, do the electrons read the arrow and go, oh man, we got to go this way? Because, and also if your electrons do travel in only one direction on what's supposed to be an AC line, you got big problems.
Yeah.
Real fast. Yeah. You gotta fire on your hands, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, anyway, so sorry. All right, now you know better. You're learning here. But learning is what we're all about here on Audio
Unleashed.
Yeah. See?
Yeah.
So keep going. Keep going, man.
So anyway, again, I don't want to pick on Richard Drutman. He's a new reviewer for the Absolute Sound, and let's just look. I'm just going to say this. Like I learn stuff all the time. I learn stuff every month. I'm hopefully a better reviewer today than I was yesterday. And he's on a journey, and hopefully he'll learn some stuff. And from the comments section, because the comment section is, boy, they did not tread lightly. There was a lot of, let's just read one comment from someone named Christian Keller 4334 that I think sums up my attitude toward this pretty well. So Christian says, that's a pretty good demonstration of the placebo effect. Please don't fall for this nonsense. And goes on to explain that this is nothing in physics supports this, but psychology does, which is a point that you've made before.
Yeah.
But it's funny, just as many people coming in to say, hey, this does not stand up to scrutiny. You also have people jumping in saying, well, maybe if you have superpowers, it makes a difference. Yeah. one of those people is our old friend Michael Fremer, who comes in with quite a few comments. One person said, hey, you should do A/B testing, and Fremer got all mad about it and everything. And they had a back and forth. And at one point, Fremer comes back and says, I'm not averse to A/B testing. And I've done it and done very well at the Harman testing facilities. I've done a blind test of a fuse versus a circuit breaker. And he spells versus wrong. He spells it VERSES. And I got 100% correct identifications. And then somebody else comes in and calls him out on that crap. And he gets upset, and somebody calls him out on being upset. Then he comes back with, you're the only one very upset. I've done many blind tests and do very well, thank you. I did a series at Harman's speaker testing facility in Northridge some years ago and did extremely well. I'm sure far better than you do. Which is, really ultimately, I think if it hadn't been for the comments from Fremer, I probably wouldn't have put this in the idea board, because it goes back to something you and I have talked about a lot before, people claiming to have superpowers. Like, let's face it, Fremer's not a spring chicken. I mean, his hearing is in decline. It's just biology. It's just the truth. I'm sorry.
We're all that way.
Anybody over 30 years old, their hearing is declining. And yet Fremer would have you believe that he has superpowers. Especially. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me kind of take this apart a little bit, because look, I've known Michael Fremer since the early 90s, and I've been on a friendly basis with him, and he's made these sort of claims. I've been an advocate of AB and ABX, and basically blind testing, right? Because AB testing could be not blind, right? But
right.
The blind part is really important, and he has made all these sort of claims, both in some sort of verbiage, either in print or online, or to me personally, about all these great feats of blind testing that he has accomplished. And these are extraordinary claims. And, so I've gone, many times in my life, I can go so deep on this. Many times in my life, I'm an AES member, which costs me $100 something a year. And I only really do that almost exclusively so I can get on their e-library and tap into the extraordinary amount of audio research. So if there's some audio question that comes up, I can go on there and find papers about it, almost certainly. It's pretty rare that I can't. So I have several times gone on there to see what the audibility, because these people have done really well-controlled tests, blind tests, level match with everything controlled, and just people walking in, not knowing what they're hearing, and seeing if they can differentiate reliably to a statistically significant degree between two things. And all of these things are documented. The testing method is documented. The results are documented. All the data is there because it's a scientific paper. Okay.
Yeah.
And in these papers, I don't know of anyone being able to reliably distinguish between two normally functioning amplifiers, much less the fuse that you plug into the amplifier, okay?
Which is not in the signal path.
Which is not in the signal path, right? And so there are times when people can differentiate between different digital filters, which is not too surprising, even though it's at very high frequency. You can still hear some of that. And
hey, I'm reviewing this Marantz network audio player and CD player now that's got two filters. They don't really tell you what kind of filters they are, but you can read and tell one of them is a linear phase filter, the other is a minimum phase filter. You can hear the difference between them. Yeah. Now the problem is, which is better, right? It's like True. I don't know. Like, I can hear the difference, but I can't tell you which one's better.
But the instances of, Michael has claimed in my presence that he did a ABX test, and ABX is you listen to A, you listen to B, then you listen to X, and you tell whether X is A or B, right? And I have an ABX box. It's called the Van Alstyne. Oh, what is it called? The Ava ABX. I have serial number 3 because I bought it as soon as I saw it was available. I bought it, and they did extensive modifications of it with my feedback because I was the first person to buy it. And I sent them, a detailed, and the engineer was just like, "Oh, this is I'm so thankful for this because no one's like giving me feedback on this." And there were a couple things where like the AB, it's the whole box is basically a bunch of relays. And so all these people are like, "Oh, well, the ABX box changes the sound." No, it doesn't. It's a relay like you find in every high-end preamp out there pretty much. And, so I was finding that you could, with the A and B relays on the amp thing, you could hear the difference between the two relays when you switched. Because they were in slightly different places and they made the top of the box resonate slightly different. So he actually put a little damper in there that fixed that and a couple of other things, right?
Nice.
And it's a great box. And so I bought this thing thinking, oh, you know what? I've done all these amp comparisons and I can hear a difference. And so I'm going to buy this ABX box and I can prove that amps sound different, right? I have never passed an ABX test with this thing. Between any amps. And I've tried to even get like really different amps. I can't pass it. It's like you can hear a difference, but you can't reliably identify it.
Right.
Now, this guy, this poor guy from Absolute Sound. Yeah. I feel bad. I feel like he's like the guy who walked down the street and encountered the Scientology people with the e-meter. And he's a young mind, and he just ran into the wrong people, which is the Absolute Sound. And, and he believed all this crazy crap.
Can I give one example?
Sure.
At one point he says, and I sort of typed this as I was listening to it, so it might not be an exact quote, but I think I got it close enough. I'm sorry if I changed the intent here. But he says, I'm a drummer, so I'm particularly sensitive to the tone, particularly the metallic feel of the cymbals. Drums, I think, had more of a feeling of being one with the acoustic space, and you could hear the acoustic space around each of the drum components more clearly with a fuse in the system. Cymbals also sounded more realistic than perhaps I've ever heard them before. what is any of that? Like, what is he actually hearing, though? This is a problem I have with these sorts of reviews. They just, it's like vague booking, you know? It's just kind of hand waving, saying, "Oh, it sounded there was more space, there was more air." It's like, but what are you actually hearing? And there's no in the entire course of this this review, which is like 15 minutes long. There's nothing concrete actually said. You know, there's no mention of, oh, it improved transient response or it lowered noise or anything that you could actually. There's nothing that he said that I could go listen to and go, you know, I hear something that you're not hearing. I hear this. Because there's nothing specific said. So I don't know, man.
Yeah, ham wavy is a good way to put it. And it's a lot. I mean, he talks about going to the Mesro Jazz Club in New York and how they have, you know, there's no amplification, which I'm sorry, dude. I've been to Mesro. I play double bass. Bass players use amplification at Mesro. There's no friggin' way. I mean, I went there one time and I saw Mark Whitfield, who's a jazz guitar player, who was using an amp, okay? Yeah, they don't have a PA, but that doesn't mean people don't haul amps onto stage. And as a double bass player, I have played gigs without an amp. Yeah. And it ain't easy. And Mesro's not big, but yeah, I mean, you could play Mesro without an amp, but probably the guy had an amp on it, even if he had it on low. It's like, and you know, and this is like years ago. It's like you don't remember. You can't use that you can't use something you heard and you really don't know what it is because the strings on double basses sound radically different. So you don't really know what it sounds like in the first place. And then you're remembering it from a few years ago. And it's like, come on.
What is the statistical number? Has there anybody who said like, this is the number? If the pause is any longer than this, you can't really, your acoustic memory doesn't last that long.
I really don't remember. I had a nice discussion with Sean Olive about this. Because some guy was talking about how some guy who had a mercifully brief career as an audio reviewer was talking about how, you can't compare two headphones because, you know, your memory of the sound from the one changes your perception of the other, which is true, but not after. But I actually asked Sean about that. And he said after he's like, that's right. But after about 30 seconds, it goes away.
30 seconds. Okay.
But, you know, another thing this is another thing of this poor guy grabbing the e-meter. And, you know, basically, quote unquote, learning from reading the absolute sound and listening to other people who don't know what they're talking about, as opposed to actually, you know, reading about this stuff. And he talks about how these fuses act as a like an AC power conditioner. And okay, well, AC power conditioners have, you know, some kind of capacitance or inductance in there, right? You know, capacitors or inductors they either filter the sound with that, or they can store energy. What was like Richard Gray power conditioners.
Richard Gray Power Company.
Had a big giant like transformer in there, right? Which served as, you know, a way of storing some energy, right? So that you could put out bigger peaks and stuff when you needed it. And then you can also regenerate it, which is the way PS Audio does, which is basically what they do is they basically take a 60 hertz oscillator and they feed it into an amplifier and they create completely fresh AC power with that, which is actually the best way to do it, I think. Right. But there's no way that a little fuse can have any of those properties. It can't store an appreciable amount. It can't really store any energy at all, any more than a couple of inches of wire can. Okay, because it has almost zero resistance. It has almost zero capacitance. It has almost zero inductance. It doesn't store anything. It doesn't filter anything. It cannot act as an AC power conditioner in any way, shape, or form. And anybody who tells you that is just completely uninformed. And so that's why I don't want to beat up on a young writer, okay? Because, again, he's just listening to the wrong people. But, you know, anybody who tells you that, and that includes the manufacturer or your editors at the Absolute Sound, is someone who is steering you wrong. Yeah, they are leading you, and same with Michael Fremer here, where he's talking about these fantastical feats of A/B blind comparisons he's done. And it's like, I get mad about this because, okay, great. He's saying he's done a blind test of a fuse versus a circuit breaker and got 100% correct identifications, but unless it's documented, it doesn't count. So it's just like if I said I could flap my arms and fly, you'd be like, dude, no.
But sometimes this entire hobby is just a cult of personality, and I guarantee you there are people who believe Fremer. There are people who, he heard that in an ABX test. Well, gosh, why would Fremer lie?
And he's talking about the Harman speaker testing. I mean, I've done that many times and under many different conditions, both at press events, and they actually set up a speaker test just for me one time that I wanted to do because I used to live like 7 miles from there. And he doesn't seem to realize, like, when they set up those tests, they're selling you on the notion of blind testing. And I've done this with lots of manufacturers. Paradigm's done it with me and various other people. And they don't set up the test like, let's see if you can distinguish between these different speakers, which, by the way, you can.
Oh, yeah.
I did one where I wanted to find out the differences between different Revel models in the Performer line. And they were just like, oh, that'd be cool. We've never done that before. And so they set up a test for me, and they high passed everything at 75 hertz. So the bigger speakers would have an advantage. And I could still identify. It's not because I'm great. It's because the test was great, right?
Yeah.
And so when they have audio writers over, they don't set up a hard test. You have what's called a low anchor. You have a speaker that sucks in there, right?
Yeah.
That everyone's going to say that speaker sucks, and that'll make them comfortable and make them kind of relax a little bit and kind of get into the test more, right? It's a very common thing. I do it all the time. And then, you're not going to have, here's a bunch of very similar speakers. When I did it, they had, some kind of a Harman speaker, and they had a Klipsch, which, had horns, which sounded different. And they had a Martin Logan electrostatic in there, which sounded very different. And then they had some piece of crap in there. I can't remember what it was. So it's like, they're setting this up to sell you on blind testing. The fact that you did well, it's like, Donald Trump saying he did well on a basic, cognitive test that's designed for people with brain damage. I mean, the whole thing is, you can tell I'm just getting infuriated about this because this is just baloney.
Yeah.
And so it's like, so he makes the claims of superpowers, which, Harry Pearson, the founder of the Absolute Sound, did the same thing. He claimed he had synesthesia and he saw sound in colors, which, well, what the hell does that mean? First of all,
I actually have synesthesia, so I can tell you.
But what does it mean? But first of all, anybody can claim that. I can say I taste sound and flavors, right? What does it mean? It means nothing. And
it
even if you have
anything
synesthesia,
repeatable, I can tell you that.
How does that make you a better judge of something if you have synesthesia?
It does not at all. Not even a little bit.
But it's just claiming superpowers, claiming miracles, loaves and fishes, all that kind of stuff. And this is what people do when they're trying to assemble a following.
I mean, look, like I said, I do experience synesthesia.
Okay.
It's crossed wires, man. It's your brain confusing what input. Yeah. It's not, there's nothing special about it. It's not a good thing.
Yeah.
It's an impediment.
But I would just say, look, if Michael can actually document all these great feats of blind testing he's done, doing AES, hey, look, if someone can actually do a blind test of a fuse versus a circuit breaker and get 100% correct IDs, do an AES paper on it. And by the way, all of these audiophile publications, if this stuff really happened, they would publish it. Just like I was dying to publish the results of my ABX tests as it said, hey, I could tell the difference between 2 amps to a statistically significant degree because I would have been a giant hero in high-end audio. But you know what? Yep. I wasn't. And but I can admit it. I couldn't tell the difference. But like, you know what? If someone can actually do that in a real controlled test, blind, match levels, et cetera, publish it. Just publish it, okay?
Yep.
Oh, if you don't publish it and you don't document it, it's a lie.
Yeah. Or at least
no
we have
different
to
than a lie.
assume that it is. We have to assume that it is.
We have to assume it's a lie. Thank you. Thank you for reining me in. Thank you for leashing me in here a little bit on the audio
Unleashed
podcast. All right,
I'm going to do it again, buddy, because I've been trying for 5 minutes to tell you we need to take a break. So,
all right. Well, this is going to be the long segment anyway. The other one's going to be shorter. So,
yeah, let's go get some water and powder our noses, and we'll be right back.
All right. And we're back. This is Audio
Unleashed.
And I'm Brent.
And I'm Dennis.
Yeah.
Why you sounded a little hesitant, like you didn't know if you were Brent or not.
I'm always evolving, man. Always changing.
Are you a caterpillar or a butterfly?
I'm both and neither.
You're a chrysalis.
Anyway. Let's talk about another article, and one that I really admired for a change.
Yeah.
This is Spin Doctor number 10. Spin Doctor is Michael Trei's column in Stereophile, where he talks about vinyl stuff. Tone controls, vinyl EQ curves, and the mola mola lupe. And I should preface this by saying I've known Mike Trei for probably almost 30 years. And someone described him to me as the real Michael Fremer.
Because man, that's not nice to Trei.
Well, no, it actually is, and that person described Trei in Trei's presence to me that way. Well, because Mike Trei actually is one of his gigs. Is he goes out and sets up people's turntables. He goes out and does setup on high-end turntables for people. They're really super high-end stuff. And he lives in New York City, so plenty of clients around there. And so, he really, if you talk to him, he has really, really, really in-depth knowledge of these turntables, and it's not, demagogic BS, super hearing power stuff like that. It's real down-to-earth stuff, and he really has encyclopedic knowledge of these things and a colossal amount of real-world experience. And also, he hears from other people. Also, he hears from his clients. I think he's one of the two nicest people in this entire industry. So he's a very sweet guy. Which makes you wonder who the other one is? I think Guttenberg. Oh, okay. I think Guttenberg's a sweetie, man. He's just such a nice guy. Well, we'll deal with him in good time. Anyway, I love this article because he's talking about how when he goes to clients, they're wondering if they should get a phono preamp that has playback curves other than the standard RIAA. That's Recording Industry Association of America, right? Yeah. Okay, I hope it is. Someone's going to correct me if I'm wrong. That's just the curve that's been standardized since the mid 1950s or so. Hey, Brent. Yeah. Well, what's a curve? Okay, so Mike does a great job of explaining that. So because to get decent performance out of a turntable, first of all, the bass frequencies require a lot more back and forth of the needle, the stylus. Sorry, I'm being a real piker here, the stylus. And so therefore, if you have a lot of bass frequencies on the record, it takes up more space because the grooves have to be wider, right? So as Mike beautifully explains here, way back in the day, they decided, hey, you know what? If we cut the bass a whole lot when we, cut the record, and then we boost the bass when you play it back, then you can fit a lot more bass onto the record and then you just boost it, and it sounds, and you have basically a flat overall system response. And with the treble, they turn, with treble, you have a lot of noise on records caused from, little tiny scratches and dirt and things like that of this not microscopic, but close to microscopic stylus bouncing around on there. And one way the most primitive form of noise reduction is to boost the treble going in and then cut it coming out, right?
And this is what's called pre-emphasis and de-emphasis, right?
Precisely. And so it's used in lots of different situations in audio. But
FM radio being one of the other main ones, yeah.
But it basically, is the simplest way to do noise reduction. And so they boost the treble by 20 dB, roughly, depending on the curve. And then they cut it when you're coming through the phono pre, and it cuts your noise way back down. Okay, it's really quite simple. And one of the things, so Mike is talking about how his clients wonder if they need this curve other than RIAA. And then his usual reaction is to thumb through their record collection, where more often than not, I find they don't own a single record that was cut using a curve other than RIAA.
Yeah.
But I really liked the fact that I will say, I used to have a lot more records than I do now. I got rid of a whole bunch of them before I moved because, they're heavy and hard to haul. And I had a friend my friend Gordon Soak, who I just gave them to, who sells vintage audio. And he was like, I'll take them. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So anyway.
They're a wonderful combination of heavy and fragile. So
yeah. And he put them all in this car that he rented to drive back up to Vancouver. It was sagging so bad. Anyway, I have one record in there that was, I think, Columbia curve. There was like a Columbia curve and a Decca curve and a couple of others. And, and I just bought it for only that reason. I don't remember what it was. And so it is pretty rare. You can find them, but it's basically like either really old mono stuff from like early 1950s or 78s. And so I really liked Mike's approach to this because, he points out, these curves weren't all that terribly different. And RIAA was kind of like chosen partly because it was pretty close to most of the rest. And it was a good kind of in between. And they all work fine. It's just different. You give different engineers a problem and they'll come up with slightly different solutions, I owned a couple of tube bands that I literally dug out of the trash in New York City when I'd be walking down the street and I'd see one in the garbage and I'd grab it.
Wow.
And I do a little bit of work on them, refurbish them. And I had one, I think it was an H.H. Scott, and it had about 6 different record EQ curves on it. And so I, have kind of messed with these a little bit. But one of the things he points out is that it's really hard to know anything about what this stuff should sound like because all of those records from back then, with all these different record EQ curves, were mastered on really, really, really primitive equipment. There weren't any good speakers back then. And so it's hard to say, the mastering engineers from that era are no longer with us. It's really hard to say exactly what this stuff is supposed to sound like.
This is Dr. Tool's circle of confusion writ large.
Yeah. And he says, I love this. At the end of the day, these curves are tone controls, and it's fair game to prefer one setting over another, even if it's not what the engineer intended back in 1962. It's nice to have choices. But this also kind of made me think about, I tested some phono pre's and I've measured some. I haven't done a whole ton of work in this area. I did it for Sound and Vision for, a couple of years. And I have found that there are, if you measure preamps, let's say, it's a pretty boring job because they are mostly very similar. But with record EQ, you do find some significant and audible variations in the way people implement these different curves, right?
Yeah, with Soundstage, when Diego is measuring all the gear that I review, a lot of times he will find significant deviations in terms of the impedance, voltage, all sorts of things. It's like their specification, what it's supposed to be, and Funny enough, you measure all of the other inputs on the preamp or integrated amp, and it's like, yep, that's spec. Yep, that's spec. Yep, that's spec. Whoa, that one's a phono preamp.
Yeah.
So, yep.
And, they can be what happens a lot that I found both in a little bit in my measurements, but also talking to manufacturers about this is that, there's in audio, high-end audio, you tend to want to do things passive, right, as opposed to active. So there's no amplification involved. And so you want to implement passive filters as opposed to active filters. And active filters are actually easier to do, even though there's an amplification stage there. Well, it's easy to build an amplification stage, but it's all buffered, right? So that these sort of impedance mismatches and problems, which can also interact with your capacitors and inductors. I think in this case, mostly capacitors. I haven't dug deep into design of phono pre's, but I imagine they implement it with the capacitors because they're higher precision and they're cheaper. But if you're not buffered on both ends, if you don't have an amplification stage in the beginning and an amplification stage in the end, you can get some pretty giant interactions with either whatever is feeding the phono pre, which of course is your cartridge, right? Or you can have interactions on the back end between the phono pre and the preamp if it's not buffered. And I do know of one. I won't name any names here, but I know of one designer who actually worked with another designer who was better known for doing phono pre's, and the guy had passive output, right? There was the filters, the capacitors and resistors on the filters for this were feeding straight into the output with no buffer stage, which means you're going to get some giant impedance swings, and therefore a lot of
tonal imbalances.
It's like when you measure headphones with a high impedance amp and a low impedance output amp. You get differences, or speakers even, right?
Yeah.
So you can get audible tonal difference, and he just snuck in a buffer stage between the filters because the buffer stage prevents, the buffer stage is a little amp stage that goes between something and something else, and it's usually a very simple stage, and all it's there to do is prevent one piece of an audio circuit from interacting with another piece of an audio circuit. But then even in the implementation of the filters, I found some pretty big differences. And a couple of cases, I found one case where a company I revere and respect had their RIAA curve was way off on their preamp, and I'm kind of like, and I sent them a, they're like, well, why didn't you pick our phono pre as the best of this whatever? And I said, well, I measured it, and you're way off. And, and look, here's the measurement of a competing one that's about the same price, and it's kind of right on. And they did some digging, and they found out that somebody in the factory made a little change. And yeah, if you go changing capacitors, I've seen this with speakers too, with some pretty big speaker brands where somebody made a change on the manufacturing line, and it threw the whole thing out of whack.
Wow.
So this is why it's good to have measurements of phono pre's and not just test, because you want it to be, you want that RIAA curve to be reasonably well implemented and be, pretty close. It's still a filter, so it can still be a little bit off if you do it in the analog domain. But, you want it to be pretty darn close. You don't want it to be inaccurate. It could be inaccurate and you would hear it, but you might like it better, except maybe you want that. And maybe you don't, because then it's changing the sound.
Yeah.
And maybe you want to hear, like me, you want to hear what the mastering engineer intended, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
As close as possible.
Yep.
But then again, maybe you like the different sound of, I've seen, the old Audio Alchemy, when they were, when they had their resurgence, I think about 10 years ago, they had a phono pre that had it had RIAA curves, but it also had, you could just go in and adjust the curves however you wanted them.
Wow.
Which I thought was really cool because they're like, well, look, if people want to do, Deca curve or something, they can just go look up what Deca curve is and implement it in there if they want to do that. Or, they can just mess around with it and kind of, because a lot of people, this Mola Mola phono-pre that Mike Trei is talking about has like 90 some odd
72 different EQ curves.
Insane number of curves but the thing is, you don't need that, but you can mess around with it and play around with it and have a good time. And, people like to do that. Some people do. I don't, but a lot of people do.
Yeah, all of this is the reason I'm just not into vinyl, man. Like I mentioned in the last episode that Doug Schneider is making me get like a record player and like a really good one, but it's like, God, I just want to listen to music, man. I just want to listen to music.
But I think there's a lot of validity to, you're wandering around the planet and you go into a, record store and you find who knows what. I have a very fond... Yeah.
For me, it's Buckingham Nicks. Like they will not release that digitally. They've been threatening for about 20 years to release it on CD. And it's like, I've got like rips of that and it's like, whatever. I just want to be able to play the Buckingham Nicks LP. And that's like the one thing that I'm really looking forward to about having a record player is just being able to put Buckingham Nicks on, drop the needle, close my eyes and listen. So,
I remember I have such fond memories of, it's a discovery mechanism, right? Because you're going to find things you don't know about. And I remember I was in Denmark on a press junket. I want to say it was probably for Yamo. And I was with Steven Stone, good friend of the podcast. Mm-hmm. And we had like one day to just like go mess around Copenhagen. And we're both like, let's go see what record stores they have here. And we navigated the Copenhagen bus system and we went to all these different kind of far-flung neighborhoods to different vinyl stores. And we bought a bunch of vinyl. Just random. I found a James Blood Ulmer record I'd never heard of before. And, I think I probably bought 4 or 5 records and I think he did too. And we had a great time and we, scored some Cuban cigars and really, it was a great way to explore Copenhagen is to go look for records because then you're not going to go to the touristy spots or whatever, right? You're going to go see how people there live. And I just think that, going to a record store in a town is a great thing to do.
Can I say something, Brent?
No.
That rant that you just went on was, in my opinion, the most compelling piece of vinyl evangelism I have heard in a long, long time. Like that's like a legitimately compelling case for why I need a record player. Whereas I'm just like, whatever. And I'm listening to you going, it does sound cool. I love the record shops here in town. I love going to the record shops here because you get to talk to people who love music the way you love music, which is just, unfortunately not common. So I love the whole culture around it. I just wish the actual mechanism weren't so danged complicated for what I consider to be not technically worthwhile returns. So, but that's just me.
It's as complicated as you want to make it.
That's a good point.
Go buy a project turntable for $300 or $400 or $500 with an Audiophile red cartridge on it, and it'll sound really good. And you need very little setup on it, and just go do that. There's plenty of good ones out there. There's tons of good record players, and you don't have to spend you can spend a fortune if you so desire, but you can go spend a few hundred, $300, $400, $500, $600. I think mine's like $1,000, but I reviewed it for Sound and Vision, and I really liked it. And I really like MDF turntables.
Nice.
Back when I was reviewing them for Sound and Vision, I found I really liked turntables that have that are made from medium density fiberboard and a lot of it.
Nice.
Somehow they just had a kind of ballsy tape-like sound to them. I just liked.
Interesting.
Totally subjective, but whatever. So
what, buddy?
Yeah, what?
The whole thing about it being subjective, that I think is a great setup for our next segment. So why don't we take another break and get some more water, because I've managed to just about drain my tumbler, and we'll be right back.
All right. And we are back. This is Audio
Unleashed.
And we are here to talk about one of the most revered, famous, controversial, delightful people in the audio journalism, quote unquote, business. And that's Steve Guttenberg.
Yeah.
Who just posted a video last week that says 250,000 audiophiliac subscribers can't be wrong. Well, normally here on the Audio
Unleashed
podcast, we would dig into that very statement and examine all the logical flaws in that statement.
Oh no,
there are a lot more than 250,000 Eagles fans, and they are all wrong.
That is a great point.
So I proved it. Anyway, but what he's doing is he's celebrating the fact that he got up to, Steve has the Audiophiliac channel on YouTube, which started out as a CNET blog.
Yeah.
God, I think 20 years ago. And he started this channel 10 years ago, ish.
No, I think it was I don't think it's been that long, buddy. I think it's 7 years.
No, it's been longer than that.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, so he's up to 250,000 subscribers, which means, he's making some decent money on it. And he's got a lot of people watching him and tuning in every day, or not every day, but every time he posts a video, which used to be every day, but now is more like, I think, a couple times a week. And, Steve's videos are not... A lot of people do much snazzier videos than Steve does. A lot of Steve's videos are Steve talking to the camera and
talking to the phone.
Talking to the phone. Yeah, he uses his iPhone. He always has used his iPhone to do these things. But it's not like there's all these things zooming in and out and stuff like that. It's pretty simple, but it's compelling enough to where people want to watch him. But the interesting thing for me about this video, and I think we both have plenty of Steve stories to tell, because I've known him I think I met Steve in 1996 or 1997. He was writing for Home Theater Magazine, and he was brought in by an editor that I hated, with good reason. And so I was kind of like, oh God, who's this guy? But he kept hanging around the offices, and we just grew to love him. He was just always around, and we just did so much with him, and I've been friends with him ever since. But he talks a lot. Steve and I have a lot of disagreements, which have been documented. I think we did, when I was at Dolby, we did like a debate in Stereophile magazine that they published about surround sound versus stereo, which he turned out to be right. But actually, we're going to, maybe that issue's still out there, which we're going to be talking about in our Patreon segment coming up. But basically, he was right. But it was my job to, I was paid by Dolby to, say that surround sound was going to be the thing for music. So anyway, Steve and I, Steve has been on Steve has always done subjective reviewing. He listens to stuff. He doesn't do careful A/B blind comparisons or anything like that. He just listens to stuff. And, I tend to be like, hey, it really doesn't count unless you have blind testing and measurement. Because anybody, as we always say here on the Audio
Unleashed
podcast, anybody can listen to anything and say it sounds great. But he actually had, in this relatively brief video, which is 9 minutes long, he goes into his philosophy of reviewing. And he makes what I think are some really good points and some really valid points that I think we should talk about. That are still very much worth talking about, and I think still not well understood. And so he says about 4 minutes and something into the video, he starts talking about this, and he talks about a debate he had with Tyler Hertzen, who used to be the editor of the Inner Fidelity headphone website. And he's retired and the website's gone, sadly, in both cases. For us, maybe not for him, but for us. And, Tyler relied heavily on measurement in his judgment of headphones. And Steve does not. And so they debated this, many years ago. But he kind of brings that back up. And he says, I respect the measurement thing as another way of doing reviews. But he said, no subjective or objective review is consistent. And that, you can listen to his reviews and buy the product and say, Steve totally nailed it. Or, Steve missed some things, or Steve was completely wrong. And the same is true for objective reviews. You can buy a product that measures really well, and you can say, yes, I love this product, or you can say, no, I hate this product, or whatever. And he says, neither one guarantees that you're going to like the product that you buy. And how do you feel about that?
I mean, I do think that there is truth in that. Of course. I do think Steve is strawmanning a little bit here because for what it's worth, I've always said, for me, it doesn't matter whether I like a product or not. I'm hoping to give the reader enough information to know whether or not it would serve their purposes, right? Whereas Steve is much more of a, hey, here is what I felt about it. Here are the vibes that I got while listening to it, right? Where and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying we have different approaches. I try to take myself out of it as much as possible. And, with Steve's stuff, Steve's the star of the show. And there's with good reason. He's a very, very likable person, and I am not. But there is still that kernel of truth in that it's the only way to really know whether you're going to vibe with a piece of gear is to experience that piece of gear, right?
Right.
At one point he says, I wish there were a more secure, straightforward way of doing this, but I can't think of how that would work. And I think he's got a point, because I think all of us, what we're trying to do, well, no, not all of us. I think all of us honest actors, and I would very much include Steve in that, because I think Steve is an honest actor.
Totally
I think
uncorruptible, totally incorruptible. Yeah.
I think what we're trying to do is figure out a way to give people better buying advice. And look, man, if we for sure had the magic bullet on that, well, we'd be doing really well off financially, but we don't have it. So unfortunately, the only way I know for sure that works is the guru approach, which I just find repulsive. So, the gurus, their cult is going to buy what they say is good, and they're going to like it because they said it's good. Well, that's not Steve, and that's not me, and that's not you. So those of us who aren't a cult of personality, we are trying to find a more reliable way of saying, here's how you can, be confident in this purchasing decision.
I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, I've said this a million times. I'll say it again. I think, the gold standard for reviewing is measurements plus blind testing. Okay.
Yes.
That way, it's not a matter of what some person thinks about some product. It's not their emotional reaction to a product. They're not reacting to the brand. They're not reacting to their preconceptions or their prejudices or anything like that. It's a pure thing. That still, as Steve is pointing out, that still doesn't guarantee you're going to like the product. But it means that product doesn't suck. Okay.
Well, true.
Whereas there are products that Steve likes that I would say suck.
Yeah.
I don't want to name them because I don't like to tell people their product sucks, but there's a couple of products he likes. And, I've worked with him. He reviewed for me for years. And there were times when he really liked a product and I'd get it in and he'd be all excited, but I'd get it in. I'm like, what are you talking about? This thing's a mess.
Yeah.
And when I say a mess, I mean, from an objective standpoint, it had a lot of problems. I didn't like the sound because I would always listen first. I didn't like the sound, and I'd measure it and be like, this thing's kind of a mess. And, I'm talking about more like products that have unconventional design philosophies or design philosophies that were discarded decades ago for good reason.
Yeah.
But I also think that I actually think the guru thing is kind of okay because, and I think Steve actually is kind of a guru to a lot of people because look, he's just basing it on his own subjective impressions, right? It's just like, if you want to follow the guru, what was that guy's name? Satchidananda or whatever. Like you're just following his subjective view of the world, right?
But here's why I don't put Steve in the guru group because the gurus, and you know who I'm talking about, their attitude is if you don't agree with me, you're wrong. And Steve is like, hey, you might not agree with me. You might not like what I like,
That is true. That is true.
So that's very unguru-like behavior, man.
You're right. I think, though, that there are, and I don't want to say, I think that someone's endorsement can mean a lot. And you can enjoy a product if someone else endorses it based largely on that. And let's face it, as we always say, look, all music comes out of all these things, right?
Yeah.
And so you can enjoy any of them on some level. And if it has someone's endorsement, then that means something. It can mean a little, it can mean a lot. We were talking about Michael Fremer and the fact that, he likes to say he's not a guru, but for God's sake, he is a guru.
He's the definition of a guru.
People believe everything he says and people buy stuff because he recommends it. And manufacturers believe me, I've done marketing for manufacturers. They want his endorsement because they know that he has a lot of readers, listeners, whatever you want to call them, viewers, who will buy a product based on his endorsement. And Harry Pearson was the same way. It's like if you got Harry Pearson's endorsement, you knew you were going to sell product. And I think Michael, certainly at least with vinyl products, and I think to a lesser degree with amps and maybe speakers, but definitely with vinyl products, if you get his endorsement, you're going to sell product. And also your dealers can say, Michael Fremer, the most famous vinyl reviewer and a guy who has been called by some dunderhead publication like the Washington Post, the guru of American review, or the dean of American reviewers, right?
Yeah.
The dealer can say, hey, the dean of American reviewers says this phono pre is awesome. And, it means something to those people. Just like, one of my two basses is an Upton bass, which is made in Connecticut. And I bought it largely because Lynn Seaton, who's the head of jazz bass at University of North Texas, who I did take a week-long seminar with, he's technically as good a bass player as I've ever heard. I mean, he is look up Lynn's Lynn Seaton, Seaton, and you can find YouTube videos of him playing, and you'll just be like, oh man, I didn't know people could do that on a double bass. And he plays an Upton bass. And I kind of thought, like, you know what? If Lynn plays that bass, it's good enough for me, right? And it's a good bass. It's a really good bass. I mean, I have issues with it, like I do with every instrument I buy, but it still makes me feel good that, like, okay, he endorses this thing. I know if I have a problem with it, it's solvable, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm the problem. Probably I'm the problem. But so it means a lot, and I think it means a lot if to me, right? It means something that Steve likes a product. Now, I know that Steve sometimes likes some pretty weird products, but if Steve likes a product, I kind of think like, I should check that thing out. And many times I have done just that.
Yeah. I want to tell an interesting anecdote about Steve that might surprise you. So I've told you that my dad and I go swimming at the Y every day. We swim laps every day, half an hour first thing in the morning. And we use these Shocks open swim bone conduction headphones when we're swimming. So you put earplugs in to keep the water out, put these bone conduction things on and listen to music while we're swimming. It makes the time pass faster. So we were in the locker room the other day and a guy was like, "Hey, what are those things you guys have on your head?" And I was like, "Oh, bone conduction headphones." And he was like, "Oh, I tried those one time. They really, really sucked." And I was like, "Well, you'd be surprised how great they sound underwater because the water, sort of conducts the sound better. And they can sound really quite good. I mean, good enough for the environment you're in to pass the time." And he was like, "Oh, well, but I'm an audiophile." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. So I mean, maybe you wouldn't love them, but they sound pretty great." And he was like, "Oh, well, what do you know about sound?" And I was like, "Oh, well, it's like kind of what I do." It's like, I write about this stuff. I have a podcast. And he was like, "Do you know the audiophiliac?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've been to Steve's apartment. Yeah, he and I and Brent Butterworth produced an album one time together. Yeah, Steve's a great guy. I love him." And he's like, "Oh man, I watch all of his videos. I love his stuff. He's so great and such a nice. Is he a nice guy? Is he as nice as he seems?" And I'm like, "Yeah, he's such a nice guy." And this guy was just raving about it. And then he was like, "Well, wait now, who are you?" It's like he suddenly cared about who I was because I knew Steve.
Because you know Steve.
Yeah. And so I told him about Audio Unleashed. I don't know if he's going to listen to us or not. Hey, if you are listening to us, hey, dude from the YMCA, you're a really cool guy. But yeah, I mean, here's the point that I wanted to make. When this guy mentioned Steve Guttenberg, his eyes lit up. Like he became kind of happy in a way that was just like, there was like and it wasn't like the cultish kind of way. It was just like a peaceful happiness. Like Steve makes this guy super happy. He makes this guy's day when he releases a video. That is an incredible power. And I think one of the things that I love about Steve is that Steve recognizes that power and respects that power, and he doesn't abuse that power. And so Steve, buddy, you have earned every one of the 250,000 subscribers that you have, and I hope you realize that.
Yeah. And I think that we will probably not behave as well if we get up to 250,000 subscribers.
We don't behave as well.
We don't. We really don't already. Yeah.
Oh, anyway, you ready to wrap this thing up, buddy?
Let's wrap it up.
We got patrons to talk to. We got to get some credits out of the way first. So
I will say, I'm going to say something right now. Well, first of all, it's a Butterburger production.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
I always have to struggle to get that right. Second of all, let's just say that the second music cut is going to be recorded entirely with the Monoprice Dark Matter Sentry USB microphone, which we just made a top pick in Wirecutter, and it fluctuates from about $30 to $85. It's got multiple patterns. I'm going to do an entire recording with just that microphone, all acoustic, and see what it sounds like. So that'll be the second recording. Even though you're editing this, Dennis, I'm forcing your hand.
That's okay. For the first one, I'm just going to dig into the Butterburger house band archives and pull out one. I know which one I'm going to pick out. So
this is just to see what you can do with a microphone that is sometimes $30.
Cool. I'm looking forward to hearing that, man. When are you going to get it to me?
Over the weekend.
Okay, cool. Anything else we need to... I want to give a shout out to our dear buddy, Lauren Dragon, who was going to be with us for this episode, but she's very ill and has no voice. And so I want to say, Lauren, we're going to hang on. We're going to wait for you. We're going to do that segment next time, and hope you feel better soon, buddy.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Patrons, stick around. We'll be right back with one more for you. Everybody else, thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Yeah, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you liked what you heard and wish there'd been a little bit more of it, we got some good news for you.
Indeed, we do. If you check out patreon.com/ Audio Unleashed, all one word, you can get new episodes a little earlier than everybody else.
And sometimes it's like a day or two early. Sometimes it's nearly a week. We never really know until we start editing.
But the big plus is that you get extended cuts of every episode. And usually that's going to mean a whole extra segment that's about maybe a geekier topic or something that's a little more personal to us or something that's just going to really appeal to the hardcore Audio Unleashed listener.
Yeah, what it boils down to is if you're somebody who would support Audio Unleashed on Patreon, we're going to make sure the bonuses to every episode are really aimed straight at your interests.
Yeah, and so if you want to hear these segments, you can subscribe to our Patreon for $3 a month, which is less than I spend every single day on my cup of coffee when I go to Starbucks to write my boring articles.
Yeah. One more time with that URL, that's patreon.com/Audio Unleashed.
Or Audio
Unleashed. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.